Welcome to Stampscaping 101. This was from a live stream, and I've really cut down the time of this creation of this scene right here. Here we are stamping out this barn, okay? And I'm doing it on a half-page piece of Mohawk Everyday Digital White Coated Silk, which is a semi-gloss paper. But when I say semi-gloss, it's much, much closer to matte. All right, now I don't know. It wasn't for any reason other than I had just done a glossy cardstock scene, and I just like to mix it up, you know, for myself and the viewer. Okay, now on this scene, I'm figuring out a lot of different things that I normally don't do, okay? So on this scene, it's going to be fairly minimal in terms of the main composition on this foil card. Now, I wanted to create a horizon line, but instead of just doing a straight line, I thought a French curve might be a little bit more interesting. So, I don't know, I have a large French curve, but you can just kind of freehand out kind of this little curving kind of S-curve wave. And what I'm doing is I'm masking off that horizon line to create this kind of snowy terrain down below. Now normally I would really blend, you know, my terrain in, but this is kind of going for, like I said, that more minimalistic kind of I don't know, graphic statement in terms of areas. So on this one we have this little sloping area of snow down below. That's what that's supposed to represent. And this whole area of kind of open sky. Usually I don't like to leave so much of an open area like that to have to fill in with so much ink and blending. Now I'm adding this in here. I went in with a re-inker. Actually, these first two colors are re-inkers just because there's so much area to fill in. You know, after all, that is a half-page piece of paper up there. Not only that, but it's not glossy, so the semi-gloss, it is coated a little bit. It's going to be more absorbent, so if I just went with ink straight out of a pad, I'm not going to have a lot of ink on my applicator, so the re-inker fluid really takes care of that for me. It really saturates the paper towel with ink, and therefore I'm able to transfer a lot of ink. You know, the less ink that you're absorbing into a applicator of whatever one, you know, choice that you're using, you know, the harder it is going to be to blend it into the surface. Now, if I'm doing a much smaller area on a quarter-page card, it's not really a problem. But on something like this, with this amount of space, you really want to soak and saturate not only the surface of this paper, but you want to get the pulp of the paper a little bit moist. Okay, now I'm starting to move into kind of my mid-tone blues right here. And see how it's kind of naturally getting kind of streaky with this type of application process here with the paper towel? I mean, I could dab instead and not get it kind of streaky, but I thought that streakiness is kind of lending itself to kind of the character of the background. Okay, so I thought, yeah, it looks pretty good. It'll give the background a little bit of movement, so I just went with it and kind of emphasized the streaking kind of aspect of it. So you can see where I'm putting my fingers with my left hand, where I'm touching that, and it's almost, well, it's removing ink. So that gives you an idea of, see how I have so much ink on my fingertips there? It's because that kind of represents, you can see how damp that surface is up top there. And that's the thing that allows us to blend inks or apply the inks in a nice graceful manner. Okay, now this is another part where I'm trying to figure out that horizon line. I don't do those horizon lines too often, but see these background impressions here done in a color within that color scheme helps to create depth in there. Okay, so we're going with the pine row, and that's kind of pushing depth, and it's also filling in that area a little bit. That area in the background is, I mean, we have the movement and everything like that, but it is somewhat boring. So what do? You can put imagery back there. If I did it in black, it would kind of detract from the imagery in front of it. So what you do is you just do it in a color out of the color scheme of that background. Okay, that's one of the things I teach in my Stampscapes 2 workshop. We really push depth with the use of value, and it's the values within the color scheme that we happen to be using back there. All right, so blue, light blue on, you know, mediums and darker blues back there. All right, so we're going in with this lilac color. Just anything kind of pastel is a good one to use in snow. Blue would be good too. But no masking or anything right here. I brought some of that lilac into the barn, you know, to give it a little bit of continuity. And now that lilac just didn't kind of harmonize really well with the blue, so I'm going back to my light blue. It's a super light blue. I think I went with the re-inker fluid, and I blended that blue down into the lilac. It still looks lilac, but you have a little bit of that blue in there, and again, that's to create a little bit more visual continuity between those two kind of different zones of color, okay? You don't always have to do that. You can make much more of a graphic statement by having, you know, one color in one area and not merging with the other one. But on something like this, I don't know, it really, I don't know, it's kind of habit for me to blend in different colors, kind of foundational colors, into the different zones of even different colors. So if that was green grass down below, I'd put some blue down there into the green just to kind of harmonize it with the sky a little bit more. I should do, going forward, I don't know, just some scenes where, you know, one color is in one area and another color is in another area, and kind of never the two shall meet, you know, just to see what it would look like. It would give my pieces a different feel. Some people do it that way, and their pieces look great. Okay, so I'm kind of making my assessment here. There's a lot of other things that are going to happen in this scene, so I was really trying to figure things out kind of on the fly here. Okay, so this red barn, all right, it's going to be this isolated area of, you know, that hue. It's not only a different hue, but it's going to be a different temperature. We're going to have some warm and cool here. So even in a red barn, for that type of color, and again, it could be a neutral red or something like that, but I wanted to go a little bit warm, kind of warmth in cool, just to make it stand out a little bit more. I usually don't go in just straight with red, because I think it would look a little anemic. So what I like to do is I like to build it through the lighter tones, and I move up into those reds that it will eventually get to. All right, so here, a lighter version of red would be pink, right? It's like a pastel version of red would be pink. So I went with a warm-toned, that wasn't a distress ink color, that was an old discontinued seashells pad. Okay, but it would be similar to your, you know, your antique paper or antique linen type of thing with distress. Distress inks have some really good light, pale, kind of earthy tones, okay? All right, so I still didn't want to get to, you know, that brick red tone yet, so I'm moving it through my orange here. And the barn's getting pretty saturated, so it's like that area up in the sky with the blue tones. That barn is, you know, it's somewhat saturated, so in applying that orange ink, I didn't get a full saturation of it because, you know, it's applying wet into wet, so the wet that you're applying doesn't necessarily transfer so well, but that's a good thing because it allows you to blend colors a little bit easier. It doesn't happen so fast, so you don't get these harsh applications of whatever color you're applying at any given time. It's a slower process, but it's a more controlled process. Okay, so you can see those slight different variations of red in there, and then you have the kind of that first kind of beige color. And I'm using a lot of kind of masking here. Normally you don't have to mask, but because I have this red object amongst, you know, what would represent a kind of a white, you know, terrain, I'm being careful not to get into that area. And as you'll find out later on, because I'm touching that barn and a little bit of areas, I get little smudgy fingerprints all over my snow, but I don't worry about that type of thing. Now, one of the things that's good about these voiceovers is I can kind of focus in on kind of different aspects of things and focus in on that. And I'll show you what, you know, in scenic stamping, one of the things that's really great about the entire genre of scenic stamping, in the way that I use stamps and stampscapes and the way that I design them with the anticipation of how they'll be used, is the entire process can be kind of a sequence of application and covering up things that you don't want to see or you don't want the viewer to see. Okay, now here I'm not talking about this, but what I'm working on right now is, you know, that paper towel sponging method isn't the greatest thing for kind of detailed areas, but things like markers, you know, alcohol markers or dye-based markers, you can go in there and add in specific little areas of tone. So again, with that I was working with kind of a beige marker, pink marker, red marker. On this paper, it's not, like I said, it's coated, but it's not quite matte. So it gives you some time to go in there with alcohol markers at least and to really blend out the tone. And again, I'm putting those alcohol markers on top of kind of a damp surface of that reddish tinge inks that I've used, so it gave me time to go in and blend out those alcohol marker marks. Okay, now one of the things I did was I put that beige kind of tone on that rooftop, and I thought, that might have looked better if I kind of put like a snowfall, you know, kind of, you know, a little bit of white on top of that rooftop. So I'm going back in and I'm reversing that. So like I said, it's kind of a series of edits and corrections. On this one, I am covering up some tone with some white pigment ink. It's kind of a dirty white now, so I'm going in. See, I'm kind of remedying things with, you know, additional media or additional layers of something. So here, I have my white acrylic paint pen. Okay, it's a little bit of a thicker paint, right? And I'm going in here and I'm adding in some white in the form of little white dots. So you see that right there? It's a more opaque application of white. Now I'm going back in with my white pigment ink again, and I'll blend that in a little bit more, and I'll have my kind of cover up of my, you know, previous applications. Okay, now see, that barn doesn't harmonize with the area, so this is what I do in order to kind of harmonize and blend in an object. We have our trusty white pigment ink on a cotton ball, kind of fogging, you know, effect. We have those trees in the background, and I have that hard line with the, you know, my French curve template that I made. So I'm just going in there and kind of, I don't know, kind of creating a little bit more of a gradual transition between that sloping back hill and those trees by just putting some pigment ink in there. I use my pigment ink, I lean into my pigment ink quite a bit on my scenes. I mean, it not only covers things up and kind of distracts the viewer from weaker areas and applications of media, but it also enhances things. So kind of it obscures kind of the weaknesses, but enhances the strengths or creates the strength. All right, so see how that kind of low line fog in there kind of really creates a nice transition zone between all those different layers of red and whatnot and the white, you know, bare snow down below. Okay, so we're going in with this. Now this is one of those other things, the reason why I went with a non-glossy cardstock on this one, because I was thinking about these trees and doing them in a really strong black ink, which would be the VersaFine Clair. I can't think of a stronger black ink than the VersaFine Clair. Well, maybe VersaFine, but the VersaFine Clair is the one that you go with these days. I don't know of anyone who would buy the VersaFine over the VersaFine Clair. VersaFine's great if you have it and you don't want to buy a new pad. I didn't for years, but I don't know. I was on the Imagine Crafts site and I thought, all right, I'm just going to pull the trigger. Everyone's talking about the Clair. It's just a little bit more of a refined version of VersaFine, and I like the pad itself, the fabric of it. It's denser than the VersaFine. So it gives you a finer kind of a, I don't know, impression, I guess you could say. Okay, so there's the 3 impressions of those tree trunks with all of my stamps. I designed them to be used in multiple ways, and I try to make them as versatile as possible, so when you have 3 different tree trunks, you don't always have to stamp all 3. I'm just stamping the one off of the tree trunk trio there on the right hand side, just to give it a little bit more variation from that other tree trunk on the left. All right, so I was making my assessment, checking it out how it's looking with the mirror, or the silver foil, as close to a mirror I think as we can get in stamping. Okay, or in card making. I gave it that heat setting there because I want to color those trees a little bit, but I am worried about that VersaFine Clair being an oil-based, slow-drying ink. I mean, it's going to dry much faster on a matte paper, but on this paper, like I said, it's coated. So, this was a live stream, so I didn't want to wait forever. I'm not going to say, okay, everyone go take 15 minutes and come back and I'll, start again. I guess I could, but... now, when I started applying this dye-based ink back into it, water and oil don't mix, but still, if that oil-based ink is wet, it's going to start blurring. But I was kind of surprised that that quick heat setting did pretty well on this paper. So, I mean, the images aren't getting totally blurry. There's a little bit of black kind of blending with this blue ink, but it wasn't too bad. Okay, now this is my way that I was explaining light direction here. I just have one central vanishing point, and every time I kind of lay down these angles like this, okay, I'm always going to that same vanishing point, and I made the vanishing point just the tip of that barn. And that's the way that you can get these angles for your shadows being cast by these tree trunks here, okay? It doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, you don't have to get some kind of ruler and do that, but just in general, that's the way to do it. So see, I'm always going to that one point on the top of the barn, and at the base of my objects casting the shadow, I'm creating those angles like that. And that way, all of the angles for the shadows are all uniform and going to that same vanishing point. And that vanishing point kind of represents the light source. I'm not saying that the barn is the light source. I'm just saying an area kind of behind the barn, would be the source of light. So it's casting the shadows accordingly. I added my shadows in with the blue first, okay? And now I'm going in with black. But I'm not going in with solid black, like 100% black or anything like that. It's kind of more grayscale. And there you have your shadows. And when you get shadows being cast by your objects, it really anchors them into the scene, and it gives them visual weight and opacity. You're saying that these objects aren't see-through, and they're casting a shadow, okay? So shadows are pretty important when it comes to lighting within a scene, all right? So even if you don't do these angles like that and these hard angles, it's good to put a little bit of tone down there. And like I said, shadows can be, or often are, very rich in tone, okay? So you don't always have to think, okay, a shadow's always black. It's not. If you have a green blanket or something like that, and you look at the folds in the blanket under, certain lighting situations, the folds, the shadows are going to be darker versions of green, okay? So on something like this, we have those blue tones in the sky. I just did blue shadows and also some black, but it's more grayscale. Okay, so down there at the base, I thought, there's not any shimmer, and I wanted to add a little bit of shimmer into that snow. So going back into that shadow area, I'm adding some white again with my trusty, big, fat, white, opaque, well, somewhat opaque, acrylic paint pen. Okay, so I'm doing that, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in some, I guess it's lighting, but it also represents maybe some snow on the tree. And I'm doing it on the side of the tree facing my light, okay? So it's on the inner sides of the trees. So tree trunk on the left gets the right side treatment of, some additional highlighting. Trees on the right get the left side. Okay, so here I'm putting some of this little fog in between those trees like that. So see, all you do is just kind of mask off your trunk like that. And here I'm putting some additional little trusty, white pigmenting fog on the interior where I added those little dots. So the dots don't stand out quite so much. They're there, but they harmonize in with the lighting a little bit more. Okay, testing it out, seeing how it looks. I like the look of that, but I went in and put in these left and right larch branches just to create a little bit of foreground in here. It might have been more interesting to do them in white, but I don't know. I did them in black just to kind of frame things off a little bit more, but I don't know. The white might have been better. But when you're doing these things, when you're testing out new compositions, new structures, new anything, don't be afraid about going overboard with things. You're doing, I see the approach of doing scenes, even if you're trying to follow someone, see it like when you're going to sit down at your art desk, okay? A really good mindset is seeing your area, your working area, as kind of like your laboratory, okay? And I don't know, you don't have to think about your pieces as like, okay, I'm going to create this fine art piece, okay, and I need it to be perfect. That's the mindset a lot of people have, I find, going into something, or something a little bit similar to that. I think it's more productive, though, and more creative to see your working areas like a lab. It's a laboratory, and this scene right here is an experiment, okay? I don't have preconceived notions as far as how it's going to turn out or what my process has to be going into it. Now, I understand if someone's trying to replicate something exactly, and that's a good way to learn things too, is to just kind of follow along with like a video like this, or the full-length version actually. But, when you're going into your pieces and you're creating a piece from scratch or you're doing your variations on it, see it as your experiment. And it puts you in the great mindset of being able to come up with new ways to do something, or it gives you the freedom in which to change up and experiment and to just kind of approach things in kind of a, with a really good mindset for creativity, okay? All right, now here I'm putting in my little 0.7 millimeter paint pen highlights. Acrylic pens work on anything, so it works just fine on this silver foil. But those large branches, okay, those are going to have to be spray sealed. So something like a Krylon acrylic spray will do for that. Okay, now I didn't like all those little white dots. It looks like it was crawling with little light. So what do we do in scenic stamping? We just cover it up, okay? Sometimes in this scene I'm covering it up with white, but on here I'm just doing some additional cover-ups with black, okay? Heat setting again. That doesn't heat set permanently on there. So again, the spray sealing will help out with that. But see, now I've covered up a lot of those little crawling dots, and that kind of framed things off a little bit more. All right, I love reverse out text, and I love it on these scenes. So stamping out this in the white Brilliance ink. Again, the white Brilliance inks, or the Brilliance inks in general, will dry on non-porous surfaces like this foil, okay? I'll heat set it to make it go faster. Well, I didn't show it there. But doing little touches here. I added this little horse there. I wiped off some of its feet because he's supposed to be standing in snow, right? So there he is right there. But to give it a little bit of continuity, what I'm doing is I'm taking my white pigment ink and putting that low line fog on his body, not filling up the whole thing, going about halfway up, so I'm saying that the fog is probably, you know, kind of hovering about maybe 4 feet off the ground, 5 feet or something, I don't know, 4 feet. Checking it out, formatting the card here. Again, this is a elongated piece. This is the full page piece in the background, but half page halves here, right here. And then we have our formatting. It makes for a pretty dramatic presentation, especially for the recipient of your card. I'm looking at that now, and I just had remembered, oh yeah, you know, maybe we should print out some images in white back into it. So I have my tiny rocks that I usually use in black, and I'm stamping it out in white, you know, to represent some snowfall or some snowfall textures, just little areas. But look how great that looks in the shadow areas in there. So it just adds another little layer of depth. And there's your card. Okay, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.